discussing a potential lease agreement for the Tech Garden facility. I'm Councilor Green. I'm joined by Councilors Hogan, Carney, White, and Day. And so I don't know what's best if you want to, Rob, if you want to start and just kind of go through some of the questions that came up in the meeting, or if you want me to go through it, whatever you prefer.
Sure. I'm happy to start. First of all, thanks for having me back. I'm sorry I missed the last meeting and any challenges that created, but I think the first thing I'll say off the bat, I know the issue of the question of New York Center for Smart Cities, and I'll just say, very clearly and for the record that of course, if there were ever a decision made to host the Municipal Operations Center, right, a city function inside the expanded Tech Garden, that, of course, that would not be something that we would look to bring the city fund for. That wouldn't make any sense. It wouldn't be fair. It would be sort of contrary. But I also would just suggest that there is no plan at present to host that. I mean, there have been some very high-level conceptual conversations about the potential alignment, but at this point, we don't even know what that would mean. We don't know what kind of square footage would be required, or what kind of, from my standpoint, what kind of necessary building infrastructure would be required. We haven't gotten into that, and how that component, the New York Center for Smart Cities and/or the Municipal Operations Center, even would necessarily align with what we're trying to do with the expanded Tech Garden. So those are all conversations that we're open to, we're willing to have. I absolutely see potential alignment, especially as it relates to the work we're doing with our companies around the Internet of Things, IoT. So I think there's a clear opportunity there. But to be very clear, it would never be our intent to charge a municipal function rent in the expanded facility. And I will draw a distinction between the Municipal Operations Center, which would be a city function, and what I understand to be the second component of that, which is the New York Center for Smart Cities, which I have always understood to be something that is not a city function. Something that is a collaboration of private partners who are working on developing innovations, education, research. I think those are different things. But very clearly and for the record, we would never look to charge a city function for rent in the space.
Okay, no, and I think that makes a lot of sense, and I do agree to the extent that there's private companies that have space that are adjacent to it or working together, like, that makes sense for them to potentially pay rent. But the biggest thing I just wanted to make sure is that the city wouldn't pay rent on, our own building. So is that something that you'd be comfortable putting in as like the city would have an option under this agreement, or how would you want to go about approaching it?
Yeah, I mean, I would prefer it not to be an option. I mean, I guess, what I would say is that, as I thought about this since the questions arose last week, is any decision to host, whether it's the Municipal Operations Center or the New York Center for Smart Cities, is going to have to be something that makes sense for the city, and it's going to have to be something that makes sense for us. And until we're presented with an actual use case with some clarity around what it is, what kind of space requirements, what it's going to do, how it aligns with our mission, it's very difficult for me. I wouldn't be comfortable sort of making a hypothetical, yes, we're willing to carve out X amount of square footage in the building for a hypothetical function. What I will say is that I think, just based on the city's own procurement practices, that any agreement that we might strike with the city on a go-forward basis, even if we came to an agreement that this was mutually beneficial, would represent a new lease that's going to have to come back in front of the council. So at the end of the day, I think we're not really in control of this conversation. I think the city and the council's in control of the conversation about what might happen in the future.
I think that makes sense. I mean, I do just think, you can play this out that if people were to come out back 6 months later, we've already agreed to this lease, the city may be in a position that the best possible option to locate this center is in the Tech Garden. That's the cheapest option, but we would lose all the leverage, I guess, at that point. So that's why my general idea is if we can kind of have some sort of, doesn't have to be every detail, but some conceptual agreement of how that would work if we were to enter into agreement, I'd feel more comfortable with it. But that's just my position.
Yeah, no, I understand it. I guess I just feel like that's a really difficult thing for us to commit to at this point, because there is no clarity around what that is. I mean, I know there was a number that was thrown out in the last committee meeting that this might be 10 or 15,000 square feet of space. In fairness, that's a full floor of the expanded tech garden. That would severely limit our ability to execute on the mission and the reason why we're undertaking expansion in the first place, which is to provide more space to support those entrepreneurs. So I'm certainly not prepared to say here today that we'll carve out, an entire floor rent free for a municipal operations center, because I don't think that would be strategic in the best interests of the tech garden mission. But I am very sympathetic to the idea, the question of leverage. But again, I say we're not in control of that at that point. It's really the city that has the ability to dictate the terms of that lease arrangement.
So one of my other understandings about the idea, and I understand we haven't gotten there yet, but that if we did do it, almost like, because there is somewhat of a specific design around the way the smart cities center would be designed in terms of physically how it was built, that'd be the easiest thing to do, is to incorporate that into the initial plans to say, okay, we want to have this physical structures to do that. And is that our understanding of what we would do, or is this something that would come 3 years from now after the building's already built and there's a white shell and we just plug and play?
Well, I might actually
question for Jen.
Yeah, I was going to say I might ask someone in the administration that question, because what I'll say clearly is there is no request that is pending with us for carving out a certain amount of square footage in the building for the municipal operations center or the New York Center for Smart Cities. So at present, it has not been part of our conceptual design conversations on a go-forward basis.
I will add that the entire concept is theory and hypothetical as another option for us, and a staged approach to creating the center. And so if an initial ability to get services and functionality going, as we look for larger funding streams and larger opportunity to actually build a facility that would operate, then that could be a methodology we would use to move forward at the tech garden. At this point, there's nothing in stone.
I mean, I would offer, just in the interest of trying to be good partners, that the next phase of our work, that once hopefully we are able to get through the extension process, we're gonna let an RFP for architectural design and final programs. And so that's the work, is when we're going to do the discussion about how the uses that we envision in the building are going to necessarily affect the building design and the utilities and the infrastructure and all the rest of it. And so I would be more than happy to commit to, as part of that design process, making sure that there is engagement with the city on what the potential needs of the Center for Smart Cities or the Municipal Operations Center might be. And that will help us understand whether or not, those needs would be something that we could incorporate in the building, whether they'd be cost prohibitive based on our plan. So I will absolutely say that we will talk to the city, engage with the city, make sure we understand what those needs are. And if we can build the facility to specifications that would accommodate it in the future without impacting the rest of our project, then absolutely that would make all the sense in the world to do.
Do other councilors have questions on the smart cities component of it? Okay. Do other councilors have questions on other aspects of it before I move forward? I'll open up for that. Okay. So, I think the other thing, obviously, we've had a kind of a fundamental disagreement on was, the idea of Center State paying the city for the use of this space, right? And, my position has been just that the city has a structural deficit, and this is an opportunity for the city to gain revenue. And then your position has been, that you're a nonprofit, and that it could create a perception issue of saying that there's going to be profit in the facility. And one of the issues I know that's come up a lot has been the roof deck specifically. And I think some of the positions that Center State has taken is that it's not clear how much revenue or how profitable that aspect of it would be, and then it's primarily almost like a good neighbor thing that the Marriott had asked for, and it could be an amenity that would attract people downtown, attract people to the tech garden. and for other investment there. So, you know, one of the ideas I was considering is, should we create a lease where Center State has a lease for the entire building with the exception of the roof deck? The city retains control of the roof deck, does an RFP, and then whoever wins that RFP, whether it be the Marriott, whether it be a different caterer, just pays rent to the city. And that way the city gets a rental payment and we can get some revenue coming in. You know, you would still have this amenity, and it could benefit the Marriott, it could benefit other places. You know, we could structure it so that it wasn't in use during business hours, so it didn't interfere with the tech garden, and still, you know, it avoids the nonprofit perception issue. I'm just curious what your response is to that idea.
Yeah, so you know, we've talked about it a little bit internally because I know that this has come up. From a redevelopment standpoint, I am very leery of any agreement that would give up operational control over the top of the space that we are going to be building, designing, and operating. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, some of which you alluded to, right? Which is anything that happens on the roof has the potential to significantly impact what's happening in the building, whether it's, you know, whether it's noise, whether it's vibration, whether it's, you know, rooftop penetrations or any of those types of things. Certainly the hours of use would be a concern. I mean, the reality is the tech garden is probably not quite a 24/7 facility, but if I showed you the login hours of when our entrepreneurs go into work and when they're in the building, it's certainly not the 9-to-5 business schedule that you know, that many others are used to. So, you know, just the idea of having a use that we don't control above our facility, I think it has impact our facility and our ability to execute mission. You know, I think the other thing that I've said, and I'll offer it again, you're absolutely right. We put this idea in because the Hotel Syracuse suggested that it would be helpful to them. And I think right now, in particular, given what's happened in the hospitality industry, I think it's in all of our best interest as a community to make sure that the hotel continues to find ways to generate revenue, and that we don't end up in a situation where it goes dark and, you know, we have this sort of vacant, abandoned sort of psychological eyesore for the community. So, however, this is not something that I can like look all of you in the eye and say is worth pulling up the rest of the tech garden expansion project for. I think it would be good for us to, if we can afford it, to try to create that rooftop space and make it available to other uses, such as the hotel or others. But if this is a real sticking point, what I would say is we'll commit to, if we build it, we'll commit to just using it for our own mission-related purposes and not allowing other private uses on the space. I don't even know that we can or will choose to build it, whether or not there's enough value add or whether there's enough budget. But I really do not want to see this entire project held up over a dispute over whether or not, you know, weddings is an appropriate use of that space.
So that's not quite my position. My position isn't saying that we shouldn't have a roof deck. The position is that, you know, that I think it's a good amenity. I don't have a problem with it, but that the city should be the one making the revenue off of it, right? So I guess that's really the fundamental question here. And, you know, I understand there could be some
thought that the city would also be would be building any improvements on top of the roof, would be paying for those improvements, would be managing all the operations and maintenance associated with it. And
the thought would be this would be the return on the investment for the city owning the property, and, you know, and also acknowledgement that most of the money coming in is state money, right? So, and the city is part of the state, and so are the taxpayers, and this would be a source of revenue that the city would get back in exchange for giving the building away for free.
But the city would be, but what I understand you saying is that you want to retain control of the rooftop space. And so you would be taking on the you know, the financing of those improvements, the operations and maintenance associated with it, and the, you know, and the common area utilization like elevators and other things that would be necessary to provide access to the roof.
No, I'm saying the project as current, you know, you would still do that. But the city would retain control of it, do an RFP. We could include you as part of the process so that you're aware of who's going to be using it and have control over the lease agreements, but that ultimately the revenue generated from that would go back to the city. That's what I'm suggesting.
Just so I'm clear, you want us to build it. You want us to to build the infrastructure to allow access to the rooftop. But you guys want to control it and generate all the revenue off of it.
That's what I want you to use the state money receiving. That's what I'm suggesting. Yeah.
I mean, I frankly don't think that's necessarily in our best interest, the interest of the project, you know, for all the reasons that I've stated previously. I mean, I've said it I'm trying very hard to be super transparent with all of you. We don't even know if it's something that we are going to be able to accommodate in the final building design, and not to be like, we've been working on trying to secure the funding for this expansion for a while. We got the last significant grants we needed almost 15 or 16 months ago. We started the process of requesting this lease extension 13 months ago. And all throughout that time, like, the cost of constructing facilities are continuing to go up, the cost of steel, the cost of other things. So that $16.5 million budget that we had when we started this process 2 years ago is not going to go as far as it's before. And I'm not trying to be glib in any way, shape, or form. I'm just trying to explain the practical challenges that we're just executing the project in its current form.
Questions from other counselors on this, Larry?
Well, Councilor Green, or go ahead, Councilor White.
Thank you, Councilor Hogan. I was just wondering, Mr. Simpson, so, you know, if it's the case that, you know, you're not 100% sure that this amenity will end up in the final project, what would be the harm in a lease clause that stated if this amenity got built in, then that you would just agree to share some of the revenue generated from it that didn't go to directly support the Tech Gardens mission, right? That way everybody's protected, everybody's included, you retain all the control, and we simply get some return on our investment.
Yeah, I mean, I've been clear from the beginning, and I was asked a direct question a month ago, and I've said it over and over again. I put it in writing, and I've explained the reasons why. We are not amenable to a profit sharing. We haven't been. That position hasn't changed. There are lots of reasons why, and you know, and we've talked about all those. So I don't feel the need to revisit a conversation around, you know, profit sharing, even on the rooftop. You know, at one point in a conversation with Councilor Green, you know, before we came up with this, you know, these other concessions, such as the 20-year lease term and the revolving loan fund to try to be responsive, Councilor Green and I had talked about, and something that I had volunteered, which is the idea of potentially having an event use fee for any non-mission oriented events, right? If we build the facility, which we don't know that we will, anytime we're not using it for our own purposes at the Tech Garden to support the mission and the entrepreneurs and all the rest of it, that we'd come up with some sort of schedule to charge a fee that could be returned to the city, or could be used to fund a scholarship pool for, you know, inner city residents who want to have access to Tech Garden programming that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford to do those things. So I think we were willing to get creative. I will say that, you know, after that proposal, we've already made 2 other significant concessions. And at some point, this starts to get just all of this starts to make it harder for us to execute the project.
Just follow up that. It's like, what do you think the fundamental difference is between a event usage fee and any kind of profit sharing? Aren't those essentially the same things?
No, not at all. They're not all the same thing.
So you're not necessarily, the opposition isn't towards providing some additional revenue to the city. It's that you want to control the amount that might be passed on to the city.
No, it's about it is absolutely and unequivocally about the operational decision making that will inevitably change if and when a quote unquote profit sharing agreement is put in place. Listen, we know what it takes to operate a successful incubator. We've been doing it for a long time. Creating an arrangement like that puts the city and the Tech Garden in an immediate confrontational position. The city will always have an interest in taking the narrowest possible definition of allowable expenses under any agreement, and it will always be our interest to take the broadest possible view. That is, as Councilor Green and I talked about, and I think he acknowledged, although I don't want to put words in his mouth, that absolutely creates potential for litigation. It creates potential for conflict down the road. It's not something that's in our lease today. It's not something that is going to make our ability to execute the programs at the Tech Garden better. So, am I willing to still talk about an event usage fee on the roof if in a hypothetical scenario we build it, even though we've already made multiple concessions? If that gets us across the finish line to yes, then unequivocally, I will.
Thank you.
So I do just want to make one quick clarification. So what was in our original agenda book was a 15-year lease with 3 5-year extensions. And what was in our agenda book this week was a 1 20-year lease. So when we just keep talking about the term change, the original extensions needed to be jointly executed by the mayor and the council 15 years from now. So the change it was really a change from 15 years to 20 years is what we got.
That isn't consistent with my understanding. It's certainly not what we had asked for in our request for an extension. I've been clear with the council and I think with the administration from the beginning that the minimum term of site control that we need in order to execute this project is 20 years. So if that comes in the form of a 15-year lease with a 5-year option at Center State's discretion, that is sufficient for our funders and for our financing needs. If it is anything less of that, then this project becomes infeasible.
Other Councilor Hogan?
Thank you, Councilor Green. First of all, I'd like to commend Councilor Green here on raising some of these questions. But if I can weigh in on the rooftop issue, I would, having, for many of you, that I spent many years with the City Parks Department, and for a whole long time, I was in charge of special events with the city and basically being in charge of different entities using different city parks. And I would weigh in heavily against us being involved in any kind of issue with a rooftop, or Kinley alluded to with Kevin about bringing back Party in the Plaza, that was a joke in a previous meeting. But I can't see where the city would benefit at all by having any kind of involvement with either leasing or operationally, or having any kind of liability issues with a rooftop situation like that. And I don't think we'd garner any kind of money or compensation commiserate with what Center State in their letter to us offering not only their terms, but also this revolving loan fund that was, I guess, put together in the conversations with Councilor Bay. I really like this. Getting something like this, I think, would make a significant impact in some of the businesses in our business corridors that have been underserved over the years in certain census tracts. So I was wondering, Rob, if you could elaborate a little bit about the help that you'd give different businesses and those folks in those underserved census tracts.
Yeah. So I think conceptually, we know this is true from working with many entrepreneurs. When they quote unquote graduate from our programs in our building, when they reach the end of our roadmap, and Caitlin can go into more detail about what that roadmap entails if you guys are interested. But we have a very detailed written down process that we move entrepreneurs through when they first enter our programming until we're ready to say, you're now a graduate of our programming. When they leave the building, it's like leaving the nest, for lack of a better term. You're leaving a cocoon and a support ecosystem for things that have been done for you from the beginning, whether it's simple things like having your office space cleaned or having a shared coffee pot or other things. These are suddenly things that people are responsible for bringing in and managing in their own business. And so that move out of the building, it requires additional costs, and it has the particular challenge for startups of being difficult because banks and traditional financial institutions don't like to lend to startup companies. We've seen this before. We saw it with TCG Player when they were going through their expansion. They were really struggling to find access to capital and to undertake that process on Warren Street because the banks just didn't want to lend it to them. So what we feel absolutely confident, and what we've already had authorized by our executive committee is creating a $250,000 revolving loan fund. That loan fund would be accessible to any graduate of our programming. This is new money that is not accessible in our current, in any of our current programs today. So this is a brand new program that we've agreed to stand up. And that funding would be available to any company, but only companies that choose after graduating to stay in the city. This, I know, is one of the concerns Councilor Bay and others raised in the session a week ago, which is, pushing us, rightfully so, to figure out what more we could do to ensure or to incentivize that more of the economic benefit that's coming out of, this economic engine that is the tech garden is deriving to the benefit of the city and city residents and city neighborhoods. And taking that one step further, our experience with technology companies graduating from the tech garden has been that the place that they have found to call home and they sort of naturally gravitated to is the Warren Street corridor downtown, which is great. I mean, when we started this idea, this innovation corridor concept, 7, 8 years ago, Warren Street was desolated. There was nothing there. It was the biggest challenge that we had in all of downtown Syracuse. But we recognize that we have other challenges in other parts of the city too, right? The Geddes Street corridor, or South Salina Street, or South Ave, or North Salina Street, up in James Street. That there are other business corridors that also need investment. And so we are fully prepared to design this program in a way that creates an additional incentive in accessing that loan fund for a company that chooses not just to stay in the city, but goes into a neighborhood business corridor or a distressed census tract, which I know is a goal of the administration. I know it's a goal of the council. Councilor Green, I know you asked the question, what exactly does that incremental benefit look like? I can't tell you because I need to sit down. I need to talk to those entrepreneurs and figure out what kind of benefit would actually move the needle for them, right? Is it a cheaper interest rate? Is it a longer term? Both of those are on the table, and there's probably other creative ideas that we can come up with to try to make that possible. But that would be our goal. That would be our intent. It's something we talk about with all our graduates, and we would work to try to find as many of those companies as possible to get out into our neighborhoods and start bringing some of these corridors back to life.
Rob, in other words, you could work with, and you already work with our economic development people. So if there was like an empty building on South Salina Street or North Salina Street or Geddes Street, you could at least allow those graduates from the tech garden, as and in full disclosure, my daughter-in-law started her business at the tech garden and now has a place downtown. So you could also say, there's places over here on Geddes Street and North Salina Street and South Salina Street that you might want to look at too. And sort of that sort of a collaborative effort with the city to try to drive businesses into some of these long-forsaken corridors, I guess you could say.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I can even commit, and now that you mentioned it, Pat, I can commit to, making that part of our process with the loan fund, right? That if you're going to access this loan fund, if you're going to commit to stay in the city, that one of the things you also have to commit to is sitting down with the city economic development office and looking at a map of the neighborhood corridors and available real estate in the city. That's something that we do with them on a regular basis, and we clearly coordinate. But if it gives additional comfort for us to say, that'll be a requirement of the loan fund, that you got to talk to the city economic development office and get a picture of what's happening in these neighborhood corridors and how you might launch your business there. I'm more than happy to make that additional commitment today too. It's a good idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do just want to go back, Councilor Hogan, to your earlier point about parks, and just distinguish between what I'm proposing and what we see in parks right now. So this would be like a long-term lease the city would enter into with an operator. So the city would be totally out of it. We wouldn't be booking venues. We wouldn't be managing it. We would just be cashing the check from whoever the vendor we chose. In the same way that, we have a tenant in City Hall Commons that's a barber. We don't know how to cut hair. We just cash the check. So it's not something that we would be having to manage. We wouldn't have to spend staff time. It would just be, that's already going to happen. I mean, Center State already is going to be a tenant that's going to potentially have events there. It just would be the city getting the revenue.
Councilor Green, I won't get in a long debate, but there is a lot involved with being associated with any kind of events in any kind of venue. And in my tenure with the Parks Department, we found that out as far as events go, especially when you have any kind of like alcohol involved or any kind of liability or insurance issues. So I'll just leave it at that.
That liability issue is one of the reasons why we're not sure if this is going to work for us or not, right? Because there is a huge amount of additional insurance that goes into that, and unfortunately, those insurance requirements, they're not a one-time capital expenditure; they're an ongoing operations expense, and the extent to which that detracts from our ability to provide services in the building, like then we just won't do it.
I do know someone that reached out, Decca Dansel, just wanted to provide a statement from Urban Jobs Task Force. Becca, if you want to say something quickly.
Hi, thanks, Councilor Green. This is Becca Dansel. I'm president of Urban Jobs Task Force, and I'm here today to speak against this.
Becca, it's a little hard to hear. If you can speak up a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah? All right. So yeah, I'm here representing the Urban Jobs Task Force, and we're here today to speak against the deal as it currently stands. And before I share my spiel, I want to be clear that we're not speaking against the tech garden as a whole, as we believe it's a positive for our city. But we're speaking against it as it currently stands. And why is because we think that our city is not getting a fair return for our investment. If the city were to sell this building, it could be collecting almost $100,000 in taxes as the building stands. If it sold the building after your expansion, it could be collecting nearly $500,000 in taxes. Similarly, we could be collecting at least $100,000 in rent had we selected a different tenant than Center State, because we have a lot of great nonprofits in our city that provide great benefits to the city as well, and they have to pay for the space that they're in. So y'all trying to tell us that $250,000 that Center State will ultimately get back because the incentive fund is a loan program, and $20, so $1 annually that we're giving to the city, is worth the trade-off of over $100,000 in taxes, potential tax dollars, or at least $100,000 in rent for prime downtown space annually, and we call BS. So if this deal is passed as the council and Center State will be responsible for robbing our city. There's absolutely no guarantee of any new benefits because there's no guarantee anyone will use the incentive loans, even though we hope that they will. But quite frankly, we're tired, and this is the elephant in the room. I feel everybody is being all nice and politically correct. I'm not paid to be here, so I'm not doing none of that with y'all. We're tired of these sweetheart deals by Center State that are concentrating economic wealth and activity in our city. Enough. So with all that being said, because what I've sat here and listened since the beginning of the call, and it doesn't seem that Center State is willing to make nearly any concessions on this. Like having somebody talk to the Economic Development Fund office, that's not a guaranteed benefit to our city. So that's not what we're looking for when we say that we want this deal to be more rich and more of a benefit to the city. So with all that being said, on behalf of the Urban Jobs Task Force, we would like to demand that this deal be renegotiated to include one or more of the following. Either increase the lease to pay at least $100,000 or more to the city, because let's face it, why should a company with as much as Center State has be getting a free expansion with tax dollars, not paying any taxes because it's a nonprofit, and free rent, just so that they can further boost the salaries of its employees and overhead funding without providing a guaranteed benefit in a city that's struggling such as Syracuse? It's disrespectful and it's gaslighting to be proposing a deal as it is. We would also request maybe use 50% of any surplus revenue or profit, whatever you want to call it, to fund a technical skills training program so that Syracuse residents can get some of the jobs that companies produced by the tech garden will hopefully create. Or as you said, I did hear from Rob, a scholarship fund so that people could actually be eligible for tech garden programs. That would be great. Create a fund for other skill training programs in the city, such as Syracuse Built, for example. Or I also heard, and I think that my membership would like the idea of an event fee structure clause for that rooftop. So I know that was a little bit harsh, the way that I just said that, and I don't mean to disrespect or upset anybody, but it's disrespectful and it's upsetting to propose a deal like this in a city that's struggling like Syracuse. So we want to see this deal happen just as much as anybody else, but not as it's being proposed. And that wasn't a question.
Thanks, Nick.
Councilor Green, if I may.
Sure, go ahead, Councilor.
Thanks. So, Mr. Simpson, kind of following up on with what Ms. Dancel said, I was wondering, what would be the ability, or how would, Center State feel about actually making some job guarantees to city residents be tied to part of accessing this revolving fund?
I'm not entirely sure I understand what you're saying, but that as a condition of accessing the fund, that startups would also, in addition to locating in the city, would also need to hire a certain number of city residents.
Well, yeah, or make a serious concerted effort at finding city employees, because it's my understanding that yes, we want to locate these businesses here. I mean, and again, no, I don't think anybody thinks that's a bad idea. But I think part of what Ms. Ansel is saying is what are we doing to make sure that these benefits are actually inuring to members of the city? So I think one way we could do that is by tying some sort of jobs guarantee to the package.
Yeah, I completely and totally understand the intent. I need to think about it in practice a little bit. Practically speaking, I think, asking companies that access the revolving loan fund to, put forward best efforts or to, commit to a certain amount of hiring from city residents. I don't know what the right number is. I think it's possible. I think what you don't want to do is to make that requirement so onerous as to turn people away from accessing the loan fund and then locate outside of the city. That would be counterproductive. So I can't sit here today and tell you, like, without really going out and talking to the entrepreneurs, which would be the next thing we would do, I can't tell you exactly what that sweet spot is. But if you would like us to, as we design the fund, and we've committed to work with the council as we design it, if you'd like us to also think about job guarantees, job requirements, hiring requirements, then I'm certainly open to making that part of the conversation. Absolutely. And I will just point out that we are doing skills training programs currently that are designed to help city residents access technology jobs. And that's part of our work with the city through the JP Morgan Chase Advancing Cities Challenge. Like, there is real work underway. There are cohorts of people that are in process of gaining access to digital skills that they didn't otherwise have, so that they have the ability to participate in the technology growth in our community. So can we do more? Do we need to do more? Do we all need to do more? I think the answer is yes, but I don't want to leave the impression with the council or with anyone else that that there isn't work currently underway in that respect, because there is.
Understood. Thank you.
Other questions from councilors? Rob, anything else you want to close with?
No, just I do fully understand the position. This is the council's role, which is to figure out the best disposition strategy of the city's assets. And I completely understand the position that if you were to sell this building to a for-profit developer, you could get a different form of economic return. Instead of getting new companies, instead of getting economic growth, instead of getting innovation and patents, you could get tax revenue. I understand that, and it's been our position from the beginning that if the council's goal is to generate tax revenue from the property, that we should in fact explore, in the future, selling the building to a private developer, and that would be a disappointing outcome for us. But we understand that's your role, and this is a project we believe in strongly. We believe in the economic impact that it has generated, it will generate, and I think we would. And we believe that we are also doing the city. I think we feel like we're being a good partner to the city of Syracuse. We're proposing to invest $16.5 million into an asset that the city owns, and that at the end of the lease term is going to revert back. And we're really asking for to do that is a 10-year extension of our current lease. That doesn't really feel to me like it is something that should be framed as unreasonable. But if there's a overall sense that that represents a bad deal for the city, in addition to the fact that we're covering, as we have for the last 17 years, We're covering all the operations, all the maintenance costs associated with the building, and we're committing to doing that going forward. So the city doesn't have any of that liability to be responsible for. So I would just ask, I appreciate that conversation, understand that it's gotten to be a somewhat involved one, but we are enthusiastic. If the council, approves this lease, we're enthusiastic about going forward.
Green, I was wondering if I could just maybe ask Rob, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't that originally going to be the third money tower, that building?
Yeah, they actually found an economic development project that actually predates my time here in Syracuse. I know I've been doing this a while, but that is my understanding, although I can't say for certain because I wasn't involved at the time. But I believe they did build it with the idea that it could potentially be a third tower at some point in the future.
And John, Rob, also coming out of COVID, I imagine downtown property might be difficult to sell or develop. When you think it seems
it's definitely a concern that we have as we plan this expansion. And so one of the things we're going to be doing in the conceptual design process is we're going to be talking in more detail about how COVID may impact the ultimate, programming of the building, right? Does that push us into more private office space and less, sort of shared co-working space? Like that's what we're going to go through all these focus groups with our entrepreneurs and make sure that we understand, because without question, what's going on in the downtown real estate market now is anyone who has a lease that's up today through the next 18 months is looking at taking less space. And that's a long-term concern for
I just remember being in City Hall, looking across at the phone building all those years, the old telephone building that's now being remodeled, and also remembering the Excelsis moving out of downtown. It doesn't seem to me that, downtown property would be something that the city would ever want to acquire at this particular time. So just thank you, Councilor Green. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate your time. We'll end the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.